Welcome back to our election preview special of this Capitol Square. Jim Heath with Jerry Revish. Our preview of the Tuesday midterm continues with this nasty race, Jerry, for state treasurer.
That's right. Incumbent Democrat Kevin Boyce faces Republican challenger Josh Mandel. This has been a slugfest, with Mandel airing perhaps the most controversial political ad of the year. Joining Jerry and me for this roundtable discussion, Bill Hershey again from the Dayton Daily News, and we welcome James Nash from the Columbus Dispatch. I mean, this is really, the tone of this is quite something, and I think it could be argued that Mandel has produced the most negative ad of the year, that mosque ad that was sort of scorned by just about everybody in both parties.
And that went before the Elections Commission yesterday, and in fact, they did find that the ad implied, it didn't come right out and say it, but it implied that Kevin Boyce was a Muslim or that he was a member of a mosque. It's funny, a lot of people...
Which he is not.
Which he's not. He's Christian. But a lot of people don't know what the treasurer does. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of these elections boil down to really kind of peripheral issues like mosques and, you know, the religious affiliations of candidates and whether somebody's in the military.
Conspiracy theory person, you'd say Mandel even got extra mileage out of it, because after this, people who were Muslims and who were offended by that wrote letters to the editor of the Dispatch with their names in it, and then they could whisper, see, they really are. And I think that, use the word controversial, I think we might even go further than that. Some of the opinion people have said scummy. And I don't know it'll have an effect or not, but this is usually a race, I think James might agree, people don't pay much attention to it.
Yeah, you need to throw out these kind of flares to get people's attention, because really when it comes to the substance of what the treasurer does, I haven't heard much of any debate on that. It's all been on this kind of peripheral stuff.
Jerry, it's fascinating that actually Mandel ran on integrity, or has been running on integrity.
Well, I was going to say, it may come down to who's the best at demonizing their opponent in this race. I think it's going to be an emotional vote for a lot of people. They don't know too much about either one of them, but how they come off in their ads, and Mandel has spent so much more money than Kevin Boyce has.
All right, let's turn our attention to the state auditor race. Democrat David Pepper from the Cincinnati area versus Republican David Yost. Yost dropped out of the primary race, you might recall, against Mike DeWine for Attorney General to run for auditor. Pepper could be a very strong Democratic candidate in a Republican year because his base, again, in Republican-rich Hamilton County. This one, if there is a Republican wave, theoretically, Pepper would probably be in the best position here simply because he'll take a lot of those Cincinnati Republican votes.
I think it would, but I have to confess, I like Pepper's ad. You know, little pepper, ground pepper, and I think that might be catchy. Again, it's a race that probably isn't at the top of everybody's political radar, and Yost is not a high-profile person. People have never heard of him. They've never heard of Pepper. They may remember that grinding pepper ad.
And Yost is kind of trying to run as AG from in the auditor slot. He's talking about his experience as a prosecutor going after bad guys. You know, it's clear even from his ads that he really would rather be Attorney General, but it just wasn't in the cards this year, so he's still running a classic AG-style campaign for state auditor.
It will be really interesting to watch election night, how people vote, because I've been talking to folks about this election, and they can't stand these ads in general. They're fed up with all of this, and they're continuing to see it. And I think they're getting diminishing returns, all the candidates, on their projection here.
Well, and it's fascinating in this race too, where they really have spent a lot of time talking about taxes, and they've talked about who can cut government the most, and that has nothing to do with the actual office of auditor. So it'll be fascinating to see how that plays out, to whose advantage. All right, let's go to from the State House to Capitol Hill. Republicans are headed, we've been talking about this for months now, for big Senate gains in the November 2nd election. One of those gains will likely come from Ohio's U.S. Senate race, Jerry.
Republican Rob Portman has a commanding lead against Democrat Lee Fisher in the latest Survey USA poll released Wednesday, 52% to 37%. This could be one of the first races called on election night.
Bill, what happened? I mean, here you had an open Senate seat in a year. You had the Lieutenant Governor, Lee Fisher. He's been campaigning a long time. This never got going.
Nobody thought this would be the way it ended up, but let's not forget, Lee Fisher had to go through that tough primary against Jennifer Brunner, Secretary of State. They bloodied each other up some, and he also spent the money that he had. But there's another thing to remember. The seat now is held by a Republican. The Republican strategy to take over the U.S. Senate started with holding the seats they have. They made it a top priority. Lee Fisher, had he won, would have been a pickup for the Democrats. It was a new seat. The National Democrats' first priority had to be holding on to what they had also, and somewhere in there, Fisher got lost in the shuffle. He has a history of being a prodigious fundraiser. This year he ended up not being able to raise much more than, I'd say, a typical U.S. House race, wouldn't you, James?
Pretty much, and really his Achilles heel, I think, was that he is, or was, the development director in Ohio, so it's almost easier to pin the job losses on him than it is on Strickland. So that was always going to be an issue in this race, so he was starting from a deficit here.
And even before that, that shadow job of being lieutenant governor. It's just not a spot that gets you a lot of publicity and a lot of exposure.
Right, and it goes back to money, too,
yeah,
as we've been stressing. All right, the Republican wave expected to change the balance of power in the House.
That's right. And several congressional races in Ohio are expected to help tip the pot.
Now, take a look. Here's the current makeup of the U.S. House in the 111th Congress. Democrats gained the majority in the last midterm, holding 255 seats. In order for Republicans to take back control, the GOP needs to gain 39 seats, the magic number 39 Tuesday. But some analysts, check this out, are forecasting an even bigger Republican wave. They say the GOP could gain up to 60 seats, giving them an even bigger majority in the House and leadership control. James, I mean, obviously, when you look at Ohio, you have to look at some of these congressional districts, and I would probably put the 15th district, Mary Jo Kilroy, sort of on the front line. If a wave is coming, she's probably in grave danger.
And she was the beneficiary of a Democratic year 2 years ago, and likewise, she could be the victim of a Republican year this year. The 15th district is definitely a barometer of what's going on nationally. Neither candidate is super well known. They're both relatively well known because they ran 2 years ago against one another, but they're both kind of, going to ride the wave of whoever's commanding this election cycle.
Tying her line and verse to the Obama administration and Nancy Pelosi and all of those campaign ads, it works against her.
Well, she never really backed away from.
No, not at all.
No, let's not forget the Republicans drew all these congressional districts too, and when she won, as James said, 2 years ago, it was in a Democratic wave, and they had to keep counting the votes over and over to make sure she did win.
Yeah, and she underperformed Obama in this district by quite a bit, so it is sort of telling. She's never been able to quite catch up even with the rest of her ticket in this district.
And that could be said perhaps in the first congressional district as well. As we take a look, Steve Driehaus, the incumbent, won 2 years ago. He defeated longtime Congressman Steve Shabbat. Shabbat is back in this race, Bill, and it looks like, in Cincinnati, that Shabbat will defeat Driehaus. Again, him being on the front line of this wave that might be coming.
Again, the Republicans drew the district, and it favors a Republican. Shabbat is a door-to-door grassroots guy, and it looks like he's going to win again.
Let's take a look briefly. Let's breeze through these just so we know sort of. Those are the most vulnerable Democrats, the congressional districts. This is the second wave, and we'll see how big this wave is Tuesday night for Republicans. But there are now Democrats who were once considered safe who are in competitive districts. 6th District, Charlie Wilson versus Bill Johnson. Then we have the 16th District, John Bocherry, Jim Rossini, and the 18th District, Zach Space and Bob Gibbs. If they go down and there is this big pickup, again, only 39 seats, that could leave John Boehner from Ohio as the Speaker of the House. And you think back on Boehner's career, and it kind of makes you smile because who would have seen this coming? Did anybody see this coming?
John Boehner will be the comeback kid of 2010 if this happens, because he was given up for dead when he got bumped out of the Republican leadership in the late 1990s. He went to work, he put his nose to the grindstone. He gets joked about for having this tan and being a chain smoker and these great parties he throws at the Republican National Conventions. But Boehner's defied all that, and it looks like he is in line to be the first Ohio Speaker since Nicholas Longworth in 1931 when he left, and he's also from southwestern Ohio.
And very quickly, James, what is his working relationship? Do we know with the other members, particularly other Republican members and new members that might come in this wave?
Well, he pretty much is positioned at the center of his party, and he's not a Newt Gingrich figure. He's not as polarizing, perhaps, or even as polarizing as Nancy Pelosi is right now. So he's probably in a good position, basically, to lead the party, although, he doesn't have as good a Tea Party credential. If there is going to be a big contingent of Tea Party people who are elected to Congress in this cycle, that'll be his big challenge, I think, to try to work with them.
And controlling that wave.
Oh, yeah. And I think setting Obama up for 2012 here, having John Boehner in the House, that's a target they can focus on.
That could be a dream for the Obama administration and the president. All right, stay with us here on Capitol Square. We'll be right back.